Hi, thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, so without further ado, our first session is on language and culture as tools for better advocacy. And in this session, we have two expert speakers, Manisha Singh and Wong Lynn. So I'd first introduce Manisha. Manisha Singh has worked across operations, research, entrepreneurship, campaigning in the corporate world, as well as in civil society. She has led several movement building initiatives for animal advocacy in India. Manisha is currently the Director of Partnerships and Campaigns at Samayu. So, Manisha, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarita. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to start sharing my screen and I'll request you to let me know if that is visible to everybody. Okay. And Sarita, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Great. All right. Thank you. So first of all, let me start by saying I'm really grateful for this opportunity because today I can, share the exciting ways in which we've been using language and culture as tools for effective animal advocacy at Samayu. I will talk about our successes, the challenges we faced, and the learnings along the way. My experience with animal advocacy spans 14 years of animal rescue and rehab and 9 years of vegan and farm animals advocacy. I've decided to focus on my talk today on my most recent experiences at Samayu, because I believe we've had a very rich experience in the short 1.5 years of our existence, and I think that makes it especially relevant here. So let me first, talk about who we are at Samayu. We are a movement of people and organizations who care about the interconnectedness of animals, people, and our planet working together to create a just, fair world for all. We focus on farm animals and food systems transformation in India. And we do that by bringing together people and organizations working in different areas of environment, climate change, social upliftment, human rights, women empowerment, community engagement, animal rights, wildlife conservation, and public health. So what we do is to make animal rights front and center everywhere. That's really our mission and vision. It's on moving away from animal agriculture to plant-forward food production, advocating plant-based diets and narrative change to include animal interests everywhere. And we spend a lot of time thinking about the right language and being culturally, contextually sensitive as we do this. We have multiple target audiences for our work in policy, research, consumer advocacy, diet change, and movement building. This means that our language and culture initiatives and strategies have to be tailored to different target audiences. Let me pick a couple of examples to explain what we do. On May 3rd, 2023, 100 people attended our first One Health training and capacity building event in Vijayawada, Andhra Pradesh, one of the top states in India for poultry production and consumption, and in fact, the topmost for aquaculture. In order to get stakeholders to attend this session, listen up and pay attention to how bird health, human health, and planetary health are deeply interlinked, we had to choose a framework that would unite the multiple domains they represented. Frontline health workers, academicians, students from veterinary, human, and environmental disciplines, state animal husbandry department officials, farmers from intensive, semi-intensive, smallholder, backyard women farmers, local grassroots partner organizations, industry representative, media partners. We had a range of diverse stakeholders and experts attending. Our policy and research teams spent countless hours preparing, studying the local environment, doing field visits, focus group discussions with farmers, meetings with experts and stakeholders, all this to arrive at the right kind of language, the cultural sensitivities, the socioeconomic imperatives that drive that culture in order to design the program, even as we carefully and very deliberately kept the focus throughout on animal interests. We believed that we could achieve consensus on the way forward because we used language and culture as tools to bring alignment, to the extent of ensuring that our plant-based lunch menu was representative of local cuisine and using technical language that resonated with the audience. We conducted the sessions in both English and Telugu, which is the regional language in AP, and we ensured that all written material was available in both languages. Now, let me take another example of the movement building initiatives that we've been doing. We have been able to use language as a tool to bridge gaps, both within the animal rights movement, between animal rights and welfare narratives, as well as outside it. Last year, we engaged over 200 NGOs and completed our first activator, Food for a Green Planet, where we brought together stakeholders, individual experts, and organizations from across India. We organized 6 leadership convenings, culminating in an in-person one in Delhi last year. These organizations are mostly from outside the animal movement. And through careful moderation and unifying language, we agreed on themes for collective action towards sustainable food systems. We use language to balance our long-term narrative change and plant-based transitions away from animal agriculture with the reform work and immediate interventions that might resonate more with people and organizations outside the animal rights movement. So we ensure that our long-term vision always serve as the broader canvas, even as we highlight those aspects of our work that resonate with our target audience in order to build trust and credibility with multiple stakeholders. We use language that prioritizes the needs of our audience, even as we drive tangible outcomes for animals everywhere. For example, in our diet change campaign called Food and You 2.0, our partners active in environment, biodiversity, and community engagement today are talking about how animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change, how adopting plant-based diets can help achieve individual wellness goals, kindness towards animals, and justice for all animals, people, and the planet. This helps them prioritize their core areas, even as they focus on animal agriculture and plant-based consumption. We optimize language by highlighting those aspects of our work that resonate the most with our target audiences, so they readily receive and accept our messaging. We also encourage our partners to use the regional language of their choice as per local community preferences. In using language and culture as tools for effective local advocacy, we focus on building relationships. Sorry, just give me a second, trying to move to the next screen. Yeah. So in using language and culture as tools for effective local advocacy, we focus on building relationships with local communities, involving local grassroots organizations through every step of program design and implementation, including incorporating their feedback. The success of our programs and interventions are truly the result of these partnerships and coalitions we are building. We understand the importance of local support and ownership of our campaigns, and we have seen repeated success of this model in diverse communities and geographies. Whether, for example, the example I gave of the One Health training that we recently did, the stakeholder engagement we did in Andhra Pradesh, or our Food and You 2.0 plant-based diet change campaign in Jharkhand, Tripura, and Manipur, which are really in the east and northeast parts of India. And those familiar with India will know that India has a diverse range of cultures and languages across the different states and union territories in our country. So the key is also to accept that using language and culture for effective animal advocacy takes time. It takes time to prep, to implement, and also to establish trust and credibility. It is definitely a long-term process. Now let me summarize these strategies that I've covered so far by reiterating that careful consideration of language and culture has influenced the ways in which we have interacted and advocated with multiple audiences in our intersectional work, both within the animal movement and outside. Depending on the audience, we have strategized how we express and communicate. We are mindful of our target audiences' cultural sensitivities and their language and cultural identities. And not just communication, we also use these tools to shape their very experience by incorporating it in the design of our interventions. For example, our policy and research language focuses on the use of technical language and frameworks with academic and professional forums to build trust and credibility, whereas our diet change interventions are tailored for individual personal appeals using simple language for awareness and education. Additionally, we are also sensitive to the cultural and local context in which we operate, relying on our local partners to help guide the execution of our campaigns and like I said, incorporate their feedback in every possible way. Let me now talk about successes and missed opportunities as far as our Asian cultural ethos is concerned, especially in the animal rights movement, with specifically two examples. The first being a successful one through our own narrative on interconnectedness that we've used extensively, and which is deeply rooted in Eastern philosophy and culture. Whereas we think, and at least, I think that we have not been as successful with the concept of ahimsa and nonviolence as we should have in the contemporary animal rights movement in India and across Asia. Our experience tells us that the post-pandemic world values the language of interconnections. Every organization we spoke to has agreed that, looking at issues from a systems-based, holistic, 360-degree approach is the way forward. This was the key to us being able to onboard 34 partners with different agendas, most of them outside the animal movement. And we believe this is also because of our Eastern thought and philosophical values that are rooted in harmony, collective well-being, and connectedness. This has certainly worked in our favor at Samayu. We've been able to build on the narrative of interconnectedness as a cultural value that has helped unite diverse motives and thinking, and our focus has always been to drive animal interests. But there is one area that we believe the animal movement has not leveraged as much as it should have. Compassion and the concept of ahimsa or non-violence are largely untapped for animal movements in India and across Asia. While some religious groups centered on ahimsa have done work in animal welfare, for example, in establishing gaushalas or cow shelters in India, the massive exploitation of cows and buffaloes in the organized and unorganized dairy industry continues in India. The contemporary animal movement has certainly not been as effective as civil society movements in using non-violence and ahimsa to drive the personal, social, and political transformation required for farm animals advocacy today. Two examples stand out from India. So Mahatma Gandhi's deep commitment to ahimsa and his moral and spiritual awakening he associated with it is one of the best examples we could cite from India. Another example is the Chipko movement in the 1970s, where women in villages hugged trees. So women in villages in a hilly region in India were hugging trees and formed human chains to protest against deforestation. This act of hugging trees to physically protect them from being cut down became a powerful symbol of non-violent resistance. There are also powerful lessons from this movement in how it centered on the protection of forest-based livelihoods of local communities. The movement emphasized that preserving forests was not only essential for ecological balance, but also crucial for the well-being and survival of people. This is where I think the animal rights movement can learn a lot. For example, in Asia, in many regions, the reliance on traditional industries like farming, fishing, animal-based tourism may make it challenging to shift towards more compassionate practices. Economic considerations, livelihoods, availability of alternative income sources are crucial factors that we have to address in order to promote sustainable and ethical alternatives for farm animal advocacy. We may face resistance from individuals and communities who perceive changes as a threat to their cultural identity or economic livelihoods. And overcoming this resistance requires empathy, understanding, and ongoing dialogue to bridge the gap between cultural traditions and our evolving perspectives on human rights. And finally, there's a lot more to be done to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in the animal advocacy movement in Asia. Language and culture can be powerful tools to champion DEI principles. By doing so, we can create a more inclusive and equitable movement. Understanding how different forms of oppression intersect will lead to more inclusive and targeted advocacy strategies, because we have to take into account the interconnected nature of gender, race, class, and other social identities to be more comprehensive and effective as animal advocates. It requires a commitment, by intentionally leveraging language and culture to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. We think that animal advocacy movements become more inclusive, they become more relevant, and they become effective. However, it does require a commitment to ongoing learning, active engagement with diverse communities, and the willingness to adopt strategies to meet the needs and aspirations of a diverse range of individuals. And with that, I will close my talk. Thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts and experiences on this really crucial, important topic for effective animal advocacy. And over to you, Sarita. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Manisha. It's always very nice to hear you. So thank you once again. Now I introduce our second speaker, Wong E. Lynn. Wong E. Lynn is a lawyer by profession and has been volunteering with FIAPO since 1996. She was the advocacy manager and farm animal welfare program manager with FIAPO from 2019 to 2022. She is currently the country manager for Mercy for Animals in Malaysia. Lynn, I welcome you and I hand it out to you.
Thank you very much, Sarita, and thank you, Manisha, for your very illuminating presentation. Can we have someone run my slides, please?
Yes, okay, just one moment.
All right. All right, my presentation is on language and culture as tools for more effective animal advocacy in Southeast Asia. And I picked Southeast Asia because culturally we are quite similar in many respects in most of the countries. And this is based on my 4 years of experience doing farmed animal welfare advocacy work in Malaysia, and also collaborating with colleagues in the rest of Southeast Asia as part of the Open Wing Alliance. Next slide. All right, in May of this year, volunteers with the PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, held a zombie protest to promote veganism in front of the Petronas Twin Towers in Kuala Lumpur. Now, even though this was visually very captivating and it garnered a lot of media attention, the response on social media and on other forums, including newspapers, was overwhelmingly negative. Even those who claim to be vegetarian or who support vegetarianism and better animal welfare standards condemn the protests. They say things like, oh, I support vegetarianism, but I don't think this is a good protest. You don't attack members of the public this way. This is not our way of doing things. This is not our way of life. So what then is the Southeast Asian way of doing things? Are we forever condemned to just play the role of good cop and never play the role of bad cop? Next slide. Okay, most Asian societies are described as being collectivist in nature. For the purposes of our work, what we understand this to mean is that we value public order and group harmony and social harmony more than self-expression and individual rights and preferences. So it's very social emphasized. It views people as a group rather than individuals. It discourages self-expression, and it emphasizes peace, order, and harmony. Someone seen to be rocking the boat is likely to be accused of being selfish and attention-seeking or troublemaker. Asian societies also tend to be more feudal and hierarchical, and most people are quite happy to maintain such hierarchies. You will see a lot of support for the monarchy and for aristocracy and inherited privilege in much of Southeast Asia. Next. Okay, so animal advocacy in collectivist societies. So many of you will know this vegan activist, Tobias Leonard. He recommends focusing on the how to shop for, prepare, and serve plant-based foods rather than the why. Because when you move into ethical questions, a lot of people feel attacked, and then they are stuck in a long argument about whether it's ethical, whether veganism is the most ethical diet there is, and there'll be no end to it. So we'll focus on the how. And we empathize with omnivores and we encourage meat reduction. If you offer people the choice of all or nothing, they'll go for nothing. And what Tobias recommends works in Southeast Asia and in more collectivist societies too. So Asians generally try to avoid confrontation, they avoid extreme measures, though I think killing animals for food is more is a greater sign of extremism than abstaining from eating animal products. And they don't like standing out in a crowd. They don't like 180-degree turns. When we conducted sessions for students and we asked them if they've ever tried to go vegetarian, they say, I would like to, but my mom cooks for the family, and if I don't eat what she cooks, it will hurt her feelings. So hurting a family member's feelings to them is a bigger offense, is a more serious offense than consuming animal products. So next. So what are some of the linguistic nuances we can utilize when doing advocacy with members of the public, even things like press releases and letters to the editor and letters to corporations and government departments? So what are some of the linguistic nuances we can utilize? First, I would say, suggest that something is a growing trend. Everyone's doing it because Asians like to be doing whatever everyone else is doing. You don't want to stand up too much in a crowd. You don't want to appear to be arrogant or showing off. Suggest that something is the responsible and pro-social thing to do. We like to show that we are responsible, we are considerate, that we are good functioning members of a society. So we tell them it's the pro-social thing to do. And we suggest that other countries, states, societies, and corporations have already made a particular commitment or transition, and that we should follow suit, that they've already done it, why don't you? That means it's possible. Someone else has done it. It's not something so novel and so new and so outrageous that it's not been done. And if there's a friendly rivalry between countries, for example, between Malaysia and Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia, you can suggest that a neighboring country has already adopted a particular measure and that we don't want to be left behind. For example, Singapore is leading the way when it comes to cell-cultured meat, and it's already ready for market. And we thought that, oh, it's going to take decades before Malaysia reaches that point because we are a Muslim majority country. There's less emphasis on producing slaughter-free meat. But then recently, just this year, there's a news report that a Malaysian biotech company called Cell Agritech has commenced producing cell-cultured meat in Malaysia, and they've already signed a joint venture agreement with Umami Meats of Singapore. So this is one of the ways in which we can rely on the friendly rivalry between countries to push each country to do better. Next. All right, so how do we capitalize on racial and religious sentiments without causing a great big war or conflict between different faith groups and different ethnic groups? Religion is often seen as a barrier to the promotion of better animal welfare and rights. Most religions are anthropocentric, that means human-centered. I would also say that it's patriarchal. And they reinforce the idea of human dominance. Humans at the very top, everyone else is put on earth for our use, for our consumption. Trying to fight this by ridiculing or arguing with religious officials and clergy will most likely result in a backlash. It may cause a loss of support for our cause. People might say, oh, you're insulting my religion and this is just not done. And it may result in resistance to our ideas and campaigns from those who consider themselves religious. They might say, oh, my religion says this is the best practice there is, this is the safest and healthiest way of procuring food. Who are you to tell me that my religion is wrong? Next slide. Okay, so instead of arguing with religious officials, appeal to the better angels of our nature. You use language to show like we can do better than this. Your religion has a history of showing kindness to animals, to having very high standards of welfare. So promote stewardship of the environment and the protection of animals as a higher religious calling. an act of faith, or an act of religious and community service. For some of us, we may disagree with this because we feel that, oh, this is so patronizing, this is so condescending. I believe in equity and environmental justice and justice for animals. I don't believe in stewardship. But we are working with a very different audience here, people who don't even believe that animals have the right to life. They view animals as property. So we have to talk to them using terms that will appeal to them, appeal to their sense of ethics, their sense of responsibility, their sense of stewardship. And we point out how a plant-based diet meets all the requirements of the particular religion as a responsible, ethical, healthy, and purifying diet. So if you're going to give up something for Lent, try going vegan for Lent. If you're giving up something for Diwali, we'll say that serve a plant-based meal this Diwali, right? Then people won't consider you stingy or not generous if you don't do that. Do that as an ethical decision. Next slide. And tell stories from the history of the particular nation, race, and religion to show that kindness to animals is part of its history, that we have had a long history of showing compassion, of showing loving kindness. Identify religious leaders who are vegetarian or vegan. Even celebrities and key opinion leaders such as social media influencers will do. Engage the assistance and support of activists and advocates who profess that particular religion or belong to the target race. So I normally recommend reaching out to professionals such as doctors, nutritionists, veterinarians, because people tend to view them as credible. Asians value academic qualifications a lot. So they think, oh, if you're professional and you have the academic qualifications to back you up and you're vegan and you're not dead yet, I think we can believe you. I think we can trust you. Right, so next slide. And appeal to tradition and a simpler, better way of life. When you talk to people in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Thailand, many of them believe that their parents and grandparents had a better quality of life. They may not be as affluent, but they had more freedom. They spent time outdoors. They ate whole foods. They moved their bodies more. They are less likely to have lifestyle-related diseases. So use statistics to show how much meat consumption has increased. Let people tell their stories too. Like my parents' generation ate chicken twice a year, on Chinese New Year and winter solstice. They didn't get chicken or any other meat for the rest of the year. My generation would get KFC and McDonald's if you did really well in your school examinations, or if it's your birthday. You don't get fast food the rest of the time. But then the current generation, Gen Z, pretty much consumes fast food and processed foods every day, not merely as a treat. So we can use this kind of comparisons to get people to tell their stories too, because it will show a desire for them to eat healthier, to eat less processed foods. Then that's how you get them to start agreeing with you. Yes, we need to reduce, right? So highlight the increase in fast food restaurants, obesity, lifestyle diseases, and environmental degradation caused by animal agriculture. Next slide. So provide evidence that your nation or ethnic group's traditional diet was largely plant-based, that most people ate meat only during festivals and celebrations and weddings. Otherwise, the cow grazes peacefully in the backyard for the best part of its life. So, and promote traditional foods such as tofu and tempeh, not highly processed or expensive alternative proteins. A lot of people would say that, oh, I'd go vegan only, it's so expensive. Why is vegan food so expensive? I can point out that most traditional foods in Malaysia consist of fresh vegetables that are locally sourced and locally grown. So it's not necessarily expensive if you don't purchase highly processed food products. Provide how-tos. Just as Tobias recommends, instead of getting into an argument about the ethics of veganism, just provide ways to shop for, prepare, and serve traditional plant-based foods, and ways to veganize traditional cuisine and dishes. So this is Chef Dave, Kali Dev Murgaya, I think. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a vegan chef in Malaysia. He only went vegan about 4 to 5 years ago. Previously, he was a chef on Disney cruises. And of course, they had to downsize because of the pandemic, and he was back on land, and he became a vegan chef and grew a huge following on social media. Now he conducts classes, like highly subsidized classes, cooking classes for low-income families. And most of his audience is not vegan. They are mostly Malaysian homemakers and mothers who want to encourage their children to eat more vegetables, and they don't know how to prepare plant-based meals that are affordable. So this is one way we can reach out to people to say, this is affordable, this is nutritious, this is as nutritious as a meat-based meal, this is the calorie and nutritional information that you need. Right, next. How do we build allies with corporations if we can't play the bad cop at all? Most country and regional managers of food corporations in Asia are not very different from the general public, especially if they are local hires. They dislike confrontation too. So awareness of farmed animal welfare and environmental issues in Asia may be low, because what we know in, say, Jakarta, Bangkok, and Kuala Lumpur and Singapore City may not be a reflection of what the rest of the country, the more rural population, knows. So even if we are aware of cell-cultured meat, of vegan products, alternative proteins, this may be not what people in small towns and rural areas are aware of. So how this translates to our corporate advocacy is that when we tell corporations, this is what the consumer wants, they can call our bluff on it. Most of the time, they know that this is not true, that there's no such demand outside of the capital city, that the population of environmental and vegan activists is very small. And they can look at our petitions and say, well, you have a population of how many million, yet there are only 1,000 signatures, and 600 of these signatures are from the US and EU. So we're calling your bluff on it. Next slide. So here are alternative ways of communicating with corporations and campaigning when there is insufficient public support. You point out that your competitors have already made commitments and improvements. This is Jacinta and me when we were with SPCA Selangor. So we were telling McDonald's that their competitors, namely Subway and KFC, have already agreed to use cage-free eggs, and they are lagging behind. We point out that their counterparts in the European Union and North America have already made commitments. So basically, we're telling them it can be done. So make your commitment global. And we point out that Asian consumers should not be left out. Why do we have to settle for a lower standard, animal welfare standard? We shouldn't have to settle. We shouldn't be second best. We want higher welfare too. And we offer to assist with sourcing and certification processes. We tell them we'll put them in touch with Humane Farm Animal Care. We'll get the experts in to talk to them. We'll have discussions with their procurement and suppliers, and tell them that, well, it's only been done by the last 3 other food franchise companies. So if you sign on to this commitment, you will be ahead of the competition. And we tell them that it's a growing movement, and sooner or later, this is going to be the global standard. So you might as well sign on to it now and have time to adjust and have time to transition and get it done sooner than later. If you sign on now, it'll make you look like you're ahead of the competition. This might not get you an immediate response. They might not respond with an immediate commitment, but it's more likely to keep the channels of communication open, and it's far less likely to burn bridges. So far, we've not had a single company write to us and say, please don't contact us again, we are going to block you from now on. So we get a foot in the door, even if we can't get a commitment. So when do you play the role of bad cop? You play the role of bad cop when you are sure you have wide public support and possibly when you have governmental support, for example, from the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Agriculture, or when you have evidence, you have a trump card such as investigations and reports and photographs and footages of what goes on in their suppliers' farms. When you don't have that, when you're just reaching out to them to talk to them, you have to play the good cop for some time. Right, next. Government lobbying. Remember that because most Asian societies are collectivist, they are more likely to affirm and reinforce strong hierarchies. And the support for the monarchy and the clergy can be very strong. There are lèse majesty laws in countries like Thailand, Brunei, and Malaysia. And this means that any kind of message that is interpreted to be critical of the monarchy, of royalty, can result in criminal action against you. So avoid casting aspersions on royalty and members of the royal family's links to agribusinesses, food companies, and government agencies. If you know this is the agency that's supplying, say, eggs to a particular major company, just name the company. Don't start pointing out that, oh, you know, this is the crown prince of this, one of the directors is the crown prince of this particular state, and this is really unfair because you rich folks do whatever you like it to harm the average citizen. Don't point out things like that. That can be really risky, and your organization may lose public support and credibility. Just point out what corporations and government departments can do to improve farm animal welfare standards, promote a healthier and plant-based lifestyle, and protect the environment. Point out to avoid a defamation suit or lèse majesty suit, just point out whatever is factual information that is publicly available and verifiable, because when something is factual, it's a complete defense in a defamation suit. Next. So be aware of defamation and sedition laws in each country. So the standards may be quite different in each country. So if you are, let's say, trying to campaign against a particular company to try to get them to go cage-free, you cannot use footages that are from general stock photos or footages from different farms, because they'll come back to you and say, aha, we're going to sue you for libel because this is not our farm. This footage did not come from a farm. You can't prove that it did. So don't pit racial and religious groups against one another. For example, by alleging that a particular group is cruel and another group is kinder or superior or more advanced. As a young movement in the region, we need to make allies, and we cannot afford to antagonize government departments and officials or the monarchy. You don't do that until you're very powerful and you have a lot of support, like MFA and PETA and HSI in the US. Sometimes, in order to get things done, we may need to let the corporation or government agency take the credit for the improvements and changes we have recommended. If they want to claim that, oh, we've come up with this comprehensive animal welfare policy, even though it's actually the result of meetings and discussions with 5 different NGOs, let them take the credit, because the end result is that more animals live better lives and fewer animals are killed, hopefully. So saving face is an important part of Asian culture. I think this applies in East Asia as well as Southeast Asia. So helping a governmental agency save face may be necessary if it helps us win the bigger fight against cruelty to animals. So if they want to downplay our role, they want to they don't want to disclose that it's a result of campaigning, months of campaigning and protests and memorandum, handing over of memoranda, and they want to claim that it's entirely their idea, their own initiative. Sometimes you just have to let them do that. Keep your eye on the goal. You can't advocate for animals if you're arrested or if your organization is deregistered. So next. And so keep up the good work and have each other's backs. sometimes it may feel like we are David's fighting a Goliath, but ultimately Goliaths can get taken down too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eden. That was terrific. I think we could make a guidebook out of it for how to do your advocacy better at local levels. So we have a couple of questions, and maybe Manisha, you can also switch on your camera and we could take these questions with both of you. So the first question, I'll field it to Manisha. Manisha, so the question is, how does one keep a balance between respecting culture that may involve the use of animals while also advocating for animal protection?
I think the key word there is balance, right? And thanks to this fantastic presentation that Lynn just made just now, she has come up with such wonderful practical suggestions and tips, for doing that. So I'm going to lean on a little bit of that as well as I answer this question. It's about understanding that culture. It's about understanding what works in that culture. It's not about importing, what you think might be a Western philosophy to handle a situation, which could be confrontation. So in our Asian cultures, like Lynn has mentioned, confrontation doesn't necessarily work. And providing that balance, so people establishing trust and credibility is really important. There are many ways to do that, but it depends on the audience. I also saw questions, for example, on farmers. So when you're talking to a farmer audience, you have to really be careful that you find something that is elevating animal interests, but is also something that does not threaten their livelihoods immediately. You have to get a step in the door. You can't straight away go and confront them and say, go plant-based. Obviously, they're not going to listen. So, and it's a long-term process. It has to start, at a point, but you have to understand that it'll be a slow process. It'll be a long-term process. So the example that I gave for the One Health training, everyone there, whether it was farmers, whether it was, stakeholders from the industry, everybody agreed that antibiotics as growth promoters is something that we should not do. And for us, that was an amazing, amazing consensus on something that does help the animals, also gets us a foot in the door to talk to government, to talk to the farmers. Farmers also agreed this isn't right because of the discussions that we had. We had like medical health personnel, coming and presenting there, and they spoke about how antibiotics harm our individual health. It's bad for the farmer. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the animal. Can we find those levers? Can we build narratives in such a way that they take us to a point, which is a common point, that everyone agrees to? We then start our journey there. We build trust and credibility with those farmers. We get them to understand we are there for their well-being. Once that process is done, that's a long process, then we go ahead and start talking about how is it that we can move your way from animal agriculture to plant-based transitions. And even for that, we have to do research. We have to study their socioeconomic backgrounds. You have to do agri-research. You have to find out what works. And that's why I've said it's a long process. And yes, I totally agree with the majority of what Lynn said. We cannot be confrontational in our approach.
Thank you.
Sarita, does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it does. And you partly answered the other question also. So my next question is to Lynn. So a lot of people argue that their traditional or cultural food is being polluted and is misleading when veganized. That is simply can't be termed as traditional or cultural food when substitutes are used. What is an effective way to respond to this?
We can point out that traditionally, people used to catch or raise their own food, especially in the village areas, and food was much healthier and animals had a better quality of life. Chickens ran free, cows plowed the fields for a large number of years before they were finally slaughtered, right? So we say that, but now animals are raised in factory farms, which are very unhealthy. They are subjected to a lot of cruelty. They are pumped full of antibiotics and growth promoters and hormones, and that it's no longer traditional. This is no longer the right way to raise animals and to produce, to recreate a traditional dish. Let's say if you want to go really traditional, maybe you should catch your own fish and raise your own chickens for this dish. Say that people always move with the times, and that there are always better ways of doing something, that if you were to see the way animals are raised for yourself, you might not agree that this is a traditional or optimal way of raising and producing food anymore.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That does answer the question. So my next question is to Manisha. Manisha, someone has asked this question. Do you have any examples of situations in which the culture of people you were trying to work with was very resistant to your message or your work?
Yes, we face that every day. So it is, for example, even with the partner organizations, when we initially approach them, they don't understand our messaging. They don't understand where we're going with this. Then it's a continuous learning. I won't say that, we have cracked it. There are every day is a learning. You interact with somebody new in a different core area of work. With environmental organizations, it's a different, kind of discussion. With a public health organization, you have to talk differently. So it's all about molding and, managing your message. And I think the key to that is preparation. We don't go into any discussion with anybody without a lot of research and a lot of studying of where they are from, what organization they represent, which culture are they from. And that's why, that's the reason why I use Samayu as an example, because we do this every day. It's like ingrained into our very processes. And our policy and research team really is the drivers, the engine, for our work, because they do the studies and they come back to us. And then our partnerships team also does their research of which organization we are approaching, what they have done in the past, what would work with them. And then we focus, find that message which we think is going to resonate with them. We prioritize that part of our work which they will agree with the most. So that's how, and yes, we face this every day.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So another question is for Lynn. So Lynn, somebody's asked this question: how do you reach out to the youth or children who come from dairy or poultry farming families?
We ask them whether they foresee themselves continuing to do poultry farming or animal farming in the future, and if so, why? Because from my discussions with a lot of Chinese poultry farmers in Malaysia, they don't want their children to continue being poultry farmers. They've outsourced most of the work to migrant workers, migrant labor, and they want their children to work in air-conditioned offices. And they say, oh, it's hard, dirty work. You suffer a lot of losses if there's a disease outbreak. And the government makes things harder and harder for us because they keep coming up with all these guidelines about where the waste is supposed to go, where the water is supposed to go. So we talk to them, why do you want to continue? If someone doesn't express the view that they would like their children to have a job other than animal farming, poultry or livestock farming, we'll ask them, what do you like most about this job? Where do you see the industry will be in 10 years? If you could have any other job, what would it be? Well, and generally they'll say things like, if we don't farm animals, what will people eat? Vegetables aren't enough to meet everyone's nutritional needs. You will need a lot more land. Then you back that up with scientific facts that, there's a lot more vertical farming, urban farming, etc. And then animals can be produced through in labs, cell cultured meat. There are all these new technologies coming up. So nutritional needs can be met. And we say that we understand it's been in your family a long time, but the world was very different 50 years ago. It was less densely populated. The demands weren't so high. The waste generated was lower. Now with intensive agriculture, your cost goes up too, right? There are more and more demands on you by local councils and the Ministry of Environment and so forth. So we let them we ask them for their feedback first. What do you think? What do you like most about it? Is it just the profits? Is it something else? We can't immediately rush in and tell them, oh, you can't just think about money, you must think about environment. Because in a lot of Asian culture, to them, the biggest, the most noblest thing you can do is to take care of your family. Right? To them, I need to provide for my family. That's the most important thing. If I don't provide for my family, why would I care about the environment? The planet is so big. Let everyone take care of their own families and we'll all get along just fine. Many of them will think that way. So we'll ask them first for their feedback. What do you think is so good about it? What do you like best about it? Where do you see the industry is going in 10 years? How has it changed from your father's time? So
Thank you.
pretty much.
Thank you. Thank you. Very descriptive and very, very good. Like, I mean, got a lot of points to, we also work in the colleges, so I think I can also employ this somewhere. So Manisha, I have another question for you. Someone has asked, in your experience in working with stakeholders, do you come across microcultures? For example, the farmers, fishermen, aquaculture workers may feel like their livelihood goes back some generations in their family. Therefore, they feel part of an entitled culture and not amenable to animal welfare concepts. If so, how can you penetrate such microcultures?
I think, yes, that's very relevant to the work that we are doing right now with poultry and aquaculture farmers. We do have, I mean, these are traditional agriculturists, very likely pointed out. We have microcultures of these, but there are many different ways in which we perceive this going forward. So, we are starting with the research now. We don't have the answers yet in terms of what would work, say, for example, with a aquaculture farmer in Andhra Pradesh versus an aquaculture farmer in West Bengal versus another in Gujarat, say, for example, and it's going to be different, right? So I think that is something that we need to understand, that it takes research. There is no answer to, a sure shot answer. A particular farmer in a particular village in a particular region has a very different reality compared to another farmer. It also depends upon the kinds of farmers. Some of them are actually not working on the farms. They are these big farmers with running intensive farms. So the kind of, for example, we met with an aquaculture farmer recently in a field visit in Andhra Pradesh, where he spoke about how all his paddy fields now are converted to aquaculture farms. They don't have a single paddy field left, and he's a big farmer. When you look at who's actually handling the fish, who's actually working with the fish, it is people from the villages. It is farm workers who actually have been doing this also since ages. So there are these feudalistic structures which are also propagated, right? And like Elin said before, everybody wants to ensure that their children don't suffer at the end of the day. So that's the messaging we want to get out, that make this better for yourself, for your generations to come by surfacing the issues that are there in aquaculture. What are the issues? What are you dealing with? Building the awareness and education. And to start with that, to even get there, you can't straight away go and talk to them and say, oh, we are trying to move away from animal agriculture. You've got to start from a place where we are concerned about your health. We are here because there is an issue we see in your handling animals which are polluted or consuming them. Those kind of narratives have to be built before we get to addressing the deeply entrenched traditional mindsets and microcultures that exist. But we see a way forward. We are very hopeful that with the way that we are going, considering the first intervention that we had and many more that we are thinking of in future, we're going to learn from every one of this. We're going to incorporate the feedback, and we're going to make sure that this percolates down to every person who's engaged in the food system supply chain, not just the farmers. There are many other people who are involved, people who transport, who handle these goods, people who are selling them in the markets. I think that entire chain needs to be addressed because there are a lot of livelihoods depending on this. And a recognition and a sensitivity to that, in my opinion, is the beginning to address it.
Thank you so much. And with that, we'll close the question answer round. So thanks a lot, because this session I think was really, really interesting and enlightening. And I'm sure people want to connect with you. We have a couple of questions. We'll send them to you directly. So thanks once again for taking the time out. And thank you, everyone. And back to you now, Pam.
Thank you, everyone, for attending our first session. We'll resume the second sessions after 5 minutes.